Hi, welcome to this developer skills sprint on migration to the latest version of RAD Studio, C++ Builder or Delphi XE8. I'm Marco Cantu, the product manager for RAD Studio at Embarcadero Technologies, and you can follow my Twitter account at Marco Cantu. This skill sprint is focused on a new feature in XE8 or a method 1.16, and it applies to any platform because it's focused on a new feature of the IDE, namely the ability to migrate your configuration settings for the IDE from a previous version of the product. So you might think this applies only to migration, but actually it's a little wider. It's also a nice feature for developers new to one of these products. So the focus is IDE migration settings, and I'm not actually going to cover application migration as the title partially hinted, so sorry for that confusion, because actually there is quite a lot of features that relate with this tool that are worth covering in some detail. So what is this tool? The settings migration tool is a new tool. You can find it in the bin folders. Migration tool.exe is not activated automatically when you install, so you have to manually follow this process. The main goal is to migrate configurations from an older version of the IDE. So suppose you have RAD Studio XE7, XE6, or previous version, and you have configured, let's say, the editor or some of the debugger settings, or some of the compiler settings, the default compiler settings, not the project-specific ones, and you want to have the same configuration on XE8. What you can do is first install XE8, configure it, and activate the license, the copy, so run it once, and at that point you can copy the configuration over. However, the tool has a more broad focus than only this specific scenario. For example, it can be used if you have installed the product on two different machines, which is something the license allows you to do. You can copy the configuration from one machine to another. You can use it for a backup. Suppose you want to experiment something with the configurations, you can create a backup copy and then restore from that backup copy. You can copy the similar configurations to multiple machines of different developers in your team. There's one other key element to consider, is that it's not all or nothing. You can fine-tune and determine which of the settings you want to move over, and in fact that's quite critical to the success of using this tool. You seldom want to copy everything in the configuration for various reasons we'll get to in a second. So let's actually look at this tool in action. So this is RAD Studio XE7 with a specific set of background colors. Just a standard configuration, but I could have picked anything very specific. And also I turned on a few of the options of the default autosaving. So I have a couple of settings that are not default. And suppose now I want to transfer this same configuration in XE8. So let me close this one down. Let me check the current XE8 configuration and its standard colors. And if we go for for environment options, you see these autosave are not configured. So let's close this down as well. Now I have a link here, the migration settings. You can export settings to a file and then copy the file to another folder, or you can do direct migration. Direct migration is registry to registry, export is registry to file, and import is file to registry. So let's suppose I want to copy my RAD Studio XE7 settings to the current product. I don't want to have all of these things. In fact, I'm going to deselect all by default. I want to manage the autosave, autorun. Well, autorun is actually unrelated. I want the autosave. Another area I want is editor settings. So there are actually multiple sub options, but I'm going to pick them all. So all editor settings. Let's say I want form design, pick this one, and that's basically what I want, because I know I've configured a few settings that I want to copy over. There are settings that would make little sense. I mean, platform SDK integration, yes, you might have them in the same folder, but you probably want to configure for each different version of the product. When there are references to packages, you don't want to include them because the packages are incompatible between versions of the product and they have different extensions. So you should generally avoid settings. History list, you want to move your recent projects from one version to the other. That's highly unusual. There are many other evaluator windows, debug windows. There are other features you want to grab, but don't copy over everything by default because that honestly doesn't really make a lot of sense in most cases. So I'll go with this few settings. Let's say we want everything in the editor, so also big class completion. And then we copy over. We want to install in these features in XE8. These are our target. Finish. That is the list of all of the settings that were copied, and there were many of them. And then let's now close the migration tool, run XE8, and see if the settings have been moved over. So let's reopen a project, go to the source code, and we have the proper coloring for the editor window. Let's move to options. And yes, we have the editor files. Now the settings, some of the settings are mapped to these folders, these categories. For example, version control settings, editor options, Delphi options, C++ options, SDK manager. So a lot of the options come from this view, but not all of them. There are also automatically generated options that are not available as part of the options dialog. There could be third-party component options because what the tool does is really look at one section of the registry. So that's one scenario. Another scenario, as I was mentioning, is the ability to just save to a file. So export setting to a migration file. All you have to do, again, pick a version. Suppose in this case you want to back up your XE8 settings. So in this case I want to select everything because it's just kind of a backup. Temp XE. So let's use this file, temp ID settings, finish. The file has been created. So let's actually have a look to it. We can open the file with an editor. And this is everything that's been saved. It's a lot of data. It's a lot of configuration options and features. That's why you don't generally want to copy everything. There are features that are really version specific or have focuses like paths and other things don't make sense across versions. Now suppose you start the IDE and go make other changes. For example, we can go to the colors and change the background color to say white, which will look rather ugly. And suppose we do a bunch of other settings. We don't like the configuration of the settings we've got to. We have an option to rerun the migration settings tool and import settings the migration file. So now I pick the settings that we have saved, our manual backup, and we can restore the settings. Notice that there is another option, restore settings from backup. That's different because the backup is automatically created when you are overriding the default settings. So the settings in the backups are probably the original ones, those I had before importing the configuration from XE7, which is another option. So we can, every time you apply some settings to the registry, there is an automatic restore file that's generated for you, and you can use it to restore whatever it was there. Because if you mess up something with the registry, you might get to the scenario that the IDE doesn't start at all. That's a possibility. So I was saying you can restore from backup the original one, but you can also install your custom manual backup or configuration settings And again, that's the same you do if you want to move the configuration to a different computer or VM. So in this case, I'm selecting everything because it does make sense. It's in the same machine, same folders, same packages, same version. And of course, I want to install this on RAD Studio XE8. It's going to do another backup while overriding the original backup. If we now restart XE8, we can see that the standard settings, the settings that I had saved to the separate file and reloaded, have been applied again to the IDE. So that mess up with the background color that I did is overridden by restoring from those backup settings. So after this demo of the migration of the IDE configuration with the new tool, I just want to spend a minute mentioning a couple of other areas that are more project specific. First is that migrating mobile projects from iOS 32-bit to 64-bit is actually quite straightforward. There are no significant changes in your code unless you directly use pointers. The only core type that changed is longin because it's used for API mapping. So that moves from 32 to 64-bit on the iOS platform. But again, beside these very specific cases, most of your code will just move over smoothly. And this is quite different from the other native tools. Of course, HTML tools are an exception because they are not tied to the platform as much. But other native tools tend to require different data types, a change in project types, and quite a significant update of the source code for this migration. So it's a really smooth migration in this direction. Now, some of the third-party components, if they hook to native APIs, they might have to be tweaked a little. But if you have the source code, you can recompile from source code. In most cases, again, if they don't hook to other native APIs, it will work smoothly. And in general, for migration of VCL and database projects, if you are over the Unicode friction that is heavily documented with a number of white papers on our websites, moving to XE8 should be quite smooth, and you gain some performance advantages in a few areas. For database application, there's one new thing, which is a DB Express conversion script plus helper components, but there is another skill sprint focused on that, so I'll delay you to that later session. And further information about this topic, the IDE setting migration tool, there is a doc wiki link, and there is a blog post. And my recommendation, of course, if you haven't done so, is to download the trial and try to migrate your settings from the current version you are using to XE8 and see if it works smoothly. Next time, we're going to focus on the Gedit package manager and adding new components to your application using it in a very smooth way. That's next Tuesday, 5th of May. And again, is going to be run at 3 different times of the day. So that's it. Let's open this session for Q&A. And again, you can follow me as Marco Cantu on Twitter, or reach me at marcocantu@embarcadero.com. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. My name is Brian Alexakis. I am a product marketing manager here at Embarcadero Technologies, and I'm joined in the studio today with Marco Cantu and David I.
Hi.
Thanks for that great presentation today. I'm going to check out the questions here. If you have anything to add in the meantime.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to mention that on my blog post there is a reference to the ability to pass a command line parameter to the migration tool to to copy over virtual configuration. This actually has an issue, so it's not working smoothly. So there will be a fix for that extra feature that would make sense. If any of you is using multiple registry configuration, it's quite handy to have the ability to copy some of the settings from one configuration to another of the same version installed on the same machine.
Great. I'm bringing up the learning resources slide if anybody missed here. There we go. I brought the blog link back up onto the screen. And of course, if you just go to community.embarcadero.com, I imagine it's probably at the top of the list there, or near the top. Okay, let's see. Do we have any questions? If we have any questions, just a couple of comments, really. The most useful option for the migrating and saving settings is to save only the settings that differ from the default.
Yeah, the tool hasn't got that ability to filter out, but yeah, I mean, if anyone using the IDE probably knows which are the configurations he did, which are the things that he likes move over in every release. So picking those settings, and I demoed the editor one because this is an obvious candidate. It's very stable over time. There's no version dependency, but it's something that every user has its own configuration. And honestly, given there are like 5 pages with hundreds of settings and detailed settings, it can really take a lot of time to configure those. And same for the debugger settings and some of the other areas. As I mentioned, you'll never really want to move things like path configurations because the library paths depend on the version, or package configuration if you are using it to move from version to version. But there are other scenarios can be used to move your same configuration, even with library path and with a component path. If you have a multiple person in your team and they all have the same folder structure, then using this to migrate some of the configurations and settings, including packages and other features, that makes sense. And the same if you're using it for copying from one device to another, or as a backup mechanism. I want this setting saved, then I'm messing up with some of my configuration, and then if I want to get back, there was no way to undo the IDE configuration. Now this basically provides a way. So that's quite a handy tool. And then you can move from older versions. There is some flexibility, but again, if you just blindly copy over everything, that's rarely works because there are specific references. The other thing that I didn't mention is if you have extra registry keys because of some third-party tool or plugin, then those will also be considered.
Okay, I have a comment from Antonio. From experience, I saw that deployment for iOS 64-bit, you have to select also the files you want to deploy, pictures, etc.
Yeah, that's true for all platforms. But it's a new platform. So if you have an existing iOS 32 application which has specific configurations like the deployment, iOS 64 is technically a separate platform, so those settings are not migrated over, and there are reasons you might want to actually have different set of files depending on the target platform. So it's an option you have, and yes, you will have to redo some of the deployment configuration when moving from iOS 32 to 64-bit.
Thanks. And Peter has a question here, how to migrate complex component sets like Jedi?
That's basically up to, well, mostly up to the few people who are actually maintaining those component packages. In most cases, the migration is quite smooth. These components don't rely strictly on any new or recent feature of the runtime libraries unless there is some breaking change in the RTL, which is unlikely at this point. They should generally move over. But it's still some work. Now, there are possibly more incompatibilities when you consider FireMonkey and mobile because it's a little more of a moving target compared to VCL, which is a very stable platform.
Thanks. I have a question from Phyllis. Is a backup file created each time you import, migrate new settings? Are backups overwritten, or are new ones created with each import migration?
No, I think only the current one is kept. So you only have one. This is a file that's automatically copied, I think, in the user document settings folder. And so you have one of them. And in fact, at the very beginning, when you start using the tool, backup is not available because there isn't a backup file yet. If you want to manually handle multiple backup files, what you can do is to use the migration settings over time and create your own configuration files. The intention for the backup is just you do a migration, you open the IDE crashes, you get stuck, you can use the backup and be safe. So it's like the last known configuration kind of thing. But if you want to handle multiple versions over time, then you should rather create your own migration settings and save to different files.
Okay, great. Next question here from Alessandro. Are the IDE debugger configurations stored in a file on the file system or in the registry? And how to restore the default when the debugger doesn't work? It says stopping at a breakpoint.
Well, there are two types of debugger configuration. One is the debugger windows configuration, like which windows, where they are, how they are located, which are some of the global settings in terms of debugging, what you want to track, and these are IDE settings. There are other, like breakpoints and other things, which are project-specific settings. So the two are actually separate. What you can migrate here is only the overall debugger configuration, which has a limited effect on the individual project. Now, if you have issues with the actual execution, actual breakpoints to work, that's something project-specific. You might want to recompile, or you might want to restart the IDE if there is really no way around. But it isn't tied to the migration. The other thing that, depending on the unit, you might need to use to enable debug DCUs or some of the other compiler settings to enable debugging.
Okay, regarding FMX projects created in XE5, XE6, or XE7, when he opens them in XE8, he's trying to delete the records from application.deployproj, which path to XE5, XE6, XE7. So, do you see that question, Marco? It's kind of long. Maybe you can.
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah, I think that I think there are basically two ways to consider it. One is to use the current deployed project, and it will gray out things that are not valid or not correct, so you can remove them and replace with new ones. If you don't have a lot of custom deployment files, it might end up easier to actually do the opposite, which is remove that file, start from scratch, and take the defaults and redo the configuration. It's mostly up to you. Now, what you get by default is all of the default icons and images and things. So if you have customized those with your own project icons and splash screens, then you want to keep those. But there should be fewer pending dependencies. There are a couple. There are a couple of things that change over time, and you might want to remove. So it's two ways, or either the other. Yeah, it's either merge to a new, or look what it's a new. You can also create a new project, take note of what is automatically added, and move the same things over. There are differences at times, like the deployments of some of the ancillary Java classes in Android has changed over time. So there are some differences that really depend on change in the defaults for the deployment. So a good thing would be to either move over or compare your setting with that of a brand new application.
Okay, let's see here.
Okay, and in the meantime, I actually found if the doc wiki is correct, hopefully it says you can move the configuration up all the way up from Delphi 7. So it really goes back like roughly 10 versions of a Delphi, and I guess C++ Builder may be the one after that, so C++ Builder 2005.
Okay, so we have a question from David. He's trying to use the migration tool from XE7 to XE8, but it did not take his component palette configuration, tool palette settings, or desktop. And he's just wondering if it's supposed to be doing that.
It's supposed to be moving over desktop and component palette settings. Yeah, I think the structure is the same, so you should be able to do that if the matching checkbox are enabled. Yeah, I haven't tried all the various combinations, of course, so it's hard to tell. But basically what it does, it just goes and copies over the matching registry keys. Now, it doesn't take settings that depend on the project. For example, if you're saving the project desktop files and other files like those, then those take precedence. But by default, if there is no project open, then it should use the, or when you're creating a new project, it should use the registry settings.
Okay, and then there's a follow-up question for David. Let's see. He's already run the migration with all the settings, all the boxes checked, because that was the default. How can I reset XE8 back to its default and only export a few settings as Marco has said?
Well, one of the options is actually to use the backup mechanism. So you run it again on the target machine where XE8 is installed. You select, when you did that operation of copying the settings over, it created a backup file. The backup option should be enabled. It is enabled the first time you run it, but afterwards it is enabled. And that restores from the backup, which is the standard configuration. Another option, which is a little more extreme and tacky, is to actually go and delete the what happens in the registry is that there is the machine setting has the defaults, and then every time a user runs, well, let me back up a second. By default, if you make RAD Studio available to all users on the machine, because if not, it's slightly different, it creates the current machine settings, and then the first time a user executes, it copies the setting over to his account. Now you can delete the individual account setting because this will be copied over, but it's a little more tricky. There is a backup option specifically in case you erroneously move some settings that don't apply and cause some hiccups. So that's why the backup is there. That should be used.
Okay, we have a question from Terry regarding, I don't know if we have an answer for this one, but let's see here. Where would one find the BDE to XE8 conversion?
Okay, the BDE, the conversion features that are part of the FARDAC migration are among the demos. Among the demos for the database sections, there is a tools subfolder. I should actually look it up probably. There is a tools subfolder, and under the tools subfolder there is a folder called REFINE, and in that folder there are scripts that you execute pass to a tool that is called REFINE and is found in the RAD Studio bin directory. And this has the code to help migrating code that uses the BDE components in TableT query to the matching FARDAC components. There is documentation on that in the doc wiki, in the documentation for the product.
So Terry, we will go ahead and add more information about this to the blog post for you as a follow-up. Okay, let's see. From Jeffrey, there's a question. Any work with component developers to assist in migration?
Not directly. We certainly encourage them to have the new versions available when we release a new version of our product. At times it takes a few days delay. I've seen this week, actually even today, a couple of announcements from some component vendors that they are up to XE8 with their components. We can put some pressure. You as customers of those components can put some pressure on them. We can force anyone to be ready in time. Another thing that we are doing, and another related initiative that doesn't relate with paid components but with some of the third open source libraries that are available, is the Get It Package Manager. We are trying to make sure that not only a lot of third-party libraries are available by the time the product ships, but they're also one click away. So we just click on the matching get it, you get everything installed easily in the IDE. In the future, we might consider kind of automatically suggesting, hey, you had this package is installed in XE7, maybe you want to do the same and install the same in a newer version. But that's still a little rough because there might be differences in these components, so it's hard to consider a fully automated process.
Looks like we have a question from Nut. I did try the migration tool yesterday, tried to copy the settings, but now he's getting an error starting XE7 and XE8. The settings data file was not found from migration tool. What to do? And I apologize if I mispronounced your name.
Well, I recommend trying to do a backup, but it's odd that something got affected XE7 because the migration is generally, well, of course you can choose the direction, but generally one direction. In any case, you should try to use the backup mechanism, so run it again and pick the backup and see if that gets applied. Failing that, as I was mentioning earlier, you can actually, before actually deleting the configuration, because that's not the same, you can generate a new set of configuration from the defaults, and this can be done by taking the shortcut, like those added to the start menu, shortcut to the IDE, whether Delphi, C++, Builder, or RAD, doesn't really matter, and add the -r parameter with a random name, like -r foo, and it will create another registry setting that, rather than being called Studio 16.0, will be called foo. Well, it's still under Embarcadero folder, and then there is the product name and the version, and you create a fake product name. And this gets you a brand new collection of settings from the defaults, from the user machine installation. So there's never need to actually reinstall to get the registry right, because you can, in the worst case scenario, use this trick and then possibly copy back those settings from the registry.
We have a kind of a general question from Regis. Anything special to migrate an XE7 FireMonkey application to XE8 besides the third-party components? Well, I can say for one thing, I think this skill sprint's really focusing on IDE settings rather than project settings, but I'll let you comment on that, Marco.
Sure, yeah. It's there is nothing really special. There are certainly a few tricks, for example, around if you want to add support for iOS 64-bit. This is a new platform, so you might have to reconfigure the compiler settings and even the provisioning or the deployment for iOS if you want to deploy 64-bit apps, because it's like having a new platform, although it's a very close related one, because it's a new compiler, it's a new tool chain. So that's certainly something to consider. There are a few differences here and there, but there aren't really that many incompatibilities. There are certainly new features to take advantage, but that's a completely separate issue compared to just migrating existing code over.
In the meantime, I have another follow-up here. The fonts in the XE8 and the Object Inspector and Tool Palette are much larger and fatter than XE7. I tried to move, but nothing happened. Will the migration tool work?
No, this is a new configuration. This is a new feature and a new configuration in XE8. So if we kind of thought that was a preferred way, because otherwise on some computers they were really getting tiny. There are some registry settings that are mentioned in a couple of blog posts. I'm pretty sure that Malcolm Groves was one of the person blogging on it. I'm not sure if there's a blog post on the community side, but there should be. Otherwise, just look for XE8 font Malcolm Groves and on Google, and that will be easy to find. So it's something that can be reconfigured, although it's not a feature from the options. And yes, if you configure it, then you'll be able to move those settings to a future version. But given this wasn't a feature in XE7, there's no way it doesn't really work on the XE7 side.
And again, this is another bit of information that we will certainly follow up with more information on the blog post. Okay, we're getting towards the end of our questions here. We have a last one from Regis. Are there multiple backup files, or is each backup overwrite the previous one?
No, there is only one backup file. Backup file is kind of a last resource. You can create as many setting files as you want. It just save, you give it a name, you save as many as you want with different configurations over time. But when you are applying the settings, the system does one and only one backup, I think.
And I imagine you could probably just make a copy of that individual setting file and give it sort of the...
That's also a possibility, yeah. But the idea is the backup is just before applying a change to the registry, it takes a copy, while creating custom backup files, creating custom copies of the configuration files is up to you. You can decide which settings you want, which features, and it gives you more flexibility.
Right.